Hello guys, welcome back to John's Workshop, and this is workshop tips number 8, which is going to be all about squaring up stock. So as usual with my tips videos, we're going to do not just a how to square up stock, which there's probably quite a few of those already kicking around on YouTube, I'm quite sure, but we're also going to do why, the reasons behind the theory. So there'll be a little bit of theory at the start. If that's not your thing and you just want to watch swarf being made, then skip forward to the how-to bit and follow along. But I think most people, if you've got this far, would be interested in maybe some of the theory behind why the methods that we use to square up stock properly are used in that way. So we'll just go through a little bit of that, but we'll not make it too heavy. Then, as I said, we'll do a practical demo. So we're going to move over to the mill and we're going to do this in real time and walk through the process, the various stages of the process to square stock up properly. Important to note, I'm doing this on a milling machine, but the theory is absolutely transferable to a shaper, a surface grinder. The theory is the same largely, slightly different methods employed, but the theory holds true all the way through on anything where you've got a rectilinear shape or cubic shape of some sort that you want to square all the faces up on. This is part of a bigger job, so yes, there will be a follow-on video next week and you'll see the whole of the manufacture of what this job is. It's a viewer job that's come into the shop, and I took the opportunity to, because I needed to square stock up, I thought this would make a good workshop tips video for especially for the home shop guys. So that's what you'll see the rest of the manufacture in next week's video. So without any more babbling, I'll clear the board, I will come back in, we'll do a little bit of the theory, and then we'll crack on with the practical demonstration. Okay, we're in at the board, and just before we start, two things that are most important, again, whether you're doing this on a mill, on a surface grinder, or wherever. Reference surfaces, you'll hear me refer to that quite a lot through the theory and through the practical when we go to the milling machine, and also cleanliness. And what I mean by that is what it actually says. So cleanliness, every time you're doing part of a setup, you're moving the part from one face to the next. If it's in a mill, the vise needs to be spotlessly clean. Same on a surface grinder, if you're using an angle plate or a magnetic vise or whatever you're using, spotlessly clean. And at each stage you need to be deburring the block properly, and that includes the secondary burrs that you get when you just run a file over a corner. You will raise secondary burrs up when you do that, which you need to make sure you're taking those off as well. So they're really the watchwords all the way through this. So we'll just rub that off the board now, and we'll start with a bit of the theory. So I'm sort of talking this in the way I was taught it during my apprenticeship. So we're going to use the mill example. So this is a vise, and what's really important with a vise is a couple of things. One, you need to really understand your fixed jaw and your moving jaw. So your fixed jaw should be exactly that, it should be fixed, and also that is your reference surface, or should be your reference surface in this case. So what I mean by that is that's what you're going to be relying on to get you your squareness all the way through this. So if that surface in the z-axis is leaning, so if you run a DTI up and down this face and you've got any kind of run on it at all, your squareness of what you do is only going to be as good as whatever kind of run you've got on that vise. It's never going to be better than that, and it's probably going to be worse than that. So this needs to be as good as possible. Your moving jaw should never be used as your reference surface. Because it's a moving jaw, it moves, and therefore there has to be slack in whatever system, either it dovetails or whether it's just flat, like most vices, flat bed sort of rails. There will be play in there, so when you tighten your moving jaw up onto a piece of material, the moving jaw will always lift, and therefore you cannot, as the jaw lifts, you can imagine this straight up and down vice jaw here is going to kick off, so that it's it's in at the bottom and out at the top, if you like. So at that point, not square. very important. Most people know that, but there might be some watching this who don't, so apologies to those that do. So when we say reference surface, and when we go to the mill, we'll talk about the reference surface. There's two reference surfaces, one on your machine that you're going to use for your squareness, and one on your part that you're going to initially use and then subsequently use, and that reference surface will change a couple of times as you go through the squaring up, and that will all make sense later on. So what's important here, so if I put let's assume I've got a block of steel that's going to go in here. It's rough saw cut and it's trapezoidal shape, something like that, because it's just rough sawn cut. If I just clamp the vise up on that, and obviously I've exaggerated the trapezium shape here, but if I just clamp the vise up on that and don't pay any attention to it, there is every possibility that that part could kick this way so that this edge aligns with the moving jaw, which means then when the moving jaw lifts, as they do when you tighten up, you are going to kick your whole part over against whatever that moving jaw, wherever it is in space. And that's why your reference surface, which you've identified as this one on the part and this one on your jaw, as we said a minute ago, those are the two surfaces that you want mated together. So the way we do that is to put something in between the moving jaw and the part, and what I use is a piece of copper wire. So if you put a piece of copper wire in between the moving jaw and the part, what that does is there is no risk at all of the part wanting to conform to where that moving jaw is. So this forces the part to conform to the fixed jaw, and you'll get a good clamp. If you do it over the full length of the vise, you'll get a good clamping, you'll get a good hold of the part, so no worries about that. And you can also alter, you can also tweak, depending on the size of your part, how well that kind of influence you're having is on the part. So if you're gripping only in the top, I don't know, third of the vise jaws, you'll obviously need to move your spacer or your copper rod or your aluminium welding wire, something like that. You can get hardened steel balls that do this, that articulate. There's a whole different manner of ways you can do it. I like using copper wire, one because I've got a load of it kicking about, and secondly because it complies to the surface of the part. So as you tighten the vise up, the copper will crush, and you will make sure, if you've got a tapered part, so let's assume that's not only trapezoidal but across its length it's thinner at one end than it is at the other. What that means is if you've got the copper wire in there, the copper wire will squash and conform so that you get a better grip through the length of the vise jaws. So I wanted to explain that theory. Now the theory behind using something on the moving jaw there, as we've just been through, is all about that, making sure that your reference surface always stays relative to your reference surface on the machine or your vise or whatever else it is. And we'll need to use that twice as we go through this. I think it's twice through the first two operations, so you'll see that. So as we've just gone through on the board, the importance of, when you're squaring up stock, is understanding that regardless of which machine you're doing this on, be it a mill, a shaper, a surface grinder, whatever, that your reference surface, i.e. in this case the fixed jaw of my vise, is as square as possible to your table surface and your spindle. And I know on this particular vise it's reasonably square, within 5 or 10 microns up and down the length of this vise jaw to my spindle. So the next part of this is you take your stock and you just basically need to pick a surface. You need to pick your best surface as a reference surface to start with. So what I've done with this lump of stock is I've been all round it, I've deburred all the corners, I've made sure there's absolutely nothing on the whatever reference surface we choose that is going to kick this one way or the other when we put it in the vise. So file across it, make sure that's ready, nice and flat, so you get a good location up against your reference surface in the vise. So we're going to drop that in there now. I don't know whether you can see, you know, this is rocking, so this is bright mild, so cold drawn, bright mild, or cold rolled, sorry, bright mild, not drawn. And you would think this is square, you know, you could assume this is square. You can see, you know, up against the vice jaw we've got some rock, which tells me something's not square around the faces on here. So as we've just been through on the board, what we're going to do is use a piece of wire. So I've got a piece of copper wire here, and we've just been through the principles of that to make sure that as I tighten up onto the part, because we've got this circular contact point, that ensures that the back face, or my reference face, is absolutely properly located up against that known reference of my fixture of my vise. So when we machine this top face now, we know that this top face will be square to that back face. So we will get on now, machine that top face, and I'll bring you back when we're moving on to the next stage of squaring the stock up. Okay, so we've got our first surface done, and what's vitally important now is when I take this out of the vise, depending which way round I turn this in my hands, then this surface and this surface, or this surface and this surface, will look exactly the same. Now this could be, rather than being cold rolled, this could be 4 bandsawn faces or whatever it is, and you need to know which was your reference surface that you chose to start with. So we're going to use a Sharpie, and we're basically going to put a mark on the back of that surface with the Sharpie, so that I always know that my face that I've just machined is square to that back face. So we'll get this out of the vise now, deburred, and then we'll move on to the next step of the process. Okay, we've taken the part out, we've deburred it on the face we've just machined. So the only thing I can really rely on at this stage of the process is this face and this face, which is my reference face that I used up against the fixed jaw. So the next stage now is to machine a face parallel to this one, i.e. on this side, in the same way as we've just machined this one. But we're going to sit on this bottom face now, so that's important that this is sitting flat against the bottom of the vise and also square up against the back jaw in the same way we did before. So we'll be using the bit of copper wire again. Cleanliness is absolutely everything when you're doing this. If you're looking for really square, the slightest bit of muck in there is going to change your ability to get this parallel or square. So we're just going to make sure that's down in the bottom of the vise. We're going to use our copper wire again. Obviously I've got my marked jaw, my marked surface on the back up against the fixed jaw again. I'm using the copper wire again to make sure the moving jaw is not influencing what's going on the fixed jaw. I'm going to make sure that's tapped down into the bottom of the vise, and we're now going to machine this top face parallel to the bottom face and square to the reference face at the back. Okay, so we've got our two sides done now, so we know these two sides are parallel, we know they're square to my reference surface, but at this point we don't really know how good this reference surface is. We know it's smooth and free of bumps and lumps, we don't know if it's flat, so but it's as an overall plane that surface creates, these two surfaces are now square to it. Now if I clamp that in the vise any way round, the vise will locate on my two parallel surfaces. So I could machine this side, my reference face, next, or I could machine the opposite side next. It really doesn't matter at this point, because all of my location will be on the two known good surfaces that I've done. However, I always put the way I was taught was put my reference surface, which is the one that I've marked with the Sharpie, the one we've been using since the start, down to the bottom of the vise at this point, either on parallels or in this case straight down onto the base of the vise. And now where we had rocking before, I've got no rocking between the back vise jaw and that reference surface. I can't feel any movement in there at all, which I shouldn't be able to because it should all be square. So what we're going to do now is nip up on there, make sure it's tapped down onto the bottom of the vise, and we're now going to take a skim off this face, at which point our block should theoretically be all square then, albeit the reference surface underneath is still yet to be machined. So I'm going to take a skim off this face, clean it up, and then we're going to flip it over and then machine our fourth face down to finished thickness. Okay, we're going for our fourth and final side, which was our original reference surface that we used. So I've deburred everything, making sure everything's clean, and the only real thing that I'm doing here is making sure that the side I used against the fixed jaw of the vise when I machined this surface, I'm going to make sure that side is up against the fixed jaw of the vise whilst I machine the final surface. Shouldn't matter because these two surfaces are parallel to each other, but just good practice making sure that you are keeping your, wherever possible, your same reference surfaces up against your fixed jaw. Make sure that's tapped down. Get the vise up, and I've got 3mm to come off this face now, so I've got enough gap against the top of the vise jaw, so that's fine. So I'm going to now machine my fourth surface, which I'll not show you because that's the same as what you saw on the third surface. Okay, so that's got sides 1, 2, 3 and 4 done, all square to each other, and now we come on to sides 5 and 6, which are the two ends of the block. And this time it doesn't matter where you put this in the vise now, which way round, because you know everything's square, and you need to pick one edge as your reference, and basically using a square. So this is a ground square that I made as an apprentice, and that was square 30 odd years ago, so I'm fairly sure it's still square now. And basically holding the block up against that square, nip the vise, then a double check. So yeah, we're located well down the length of that square, and now I'm just going to take the lightest skim off side number 5, and then side number 6. At that point we just sit on side 5 to get a parallel face on the final side. So we've got our 5 sides now done, so we're on the final side, side 6. So really exactly the same as side 5, except I could just sit straight on the bottom of the vise, which is what I'm going to do. Gentle knit, gentle tap down, just to make sure that's down in the bottom of the vise. I think that hammer might be slightly overkill for this job, but it's near to hand. We'll knit the vise up at that, and then as a double check I can use the same square, and that should be absolutely square up to that edge if everything's worked out correctly, and it is. So we're happy that we're all square. I'm not going to show the machining of side 6 because it looks exactly the same as the machining of side 5, so I'm going to crack on now and get that machined, and then we'll bring you back and we'll wrap this workshop tips video up. Well, there we go guys, that gets us to the end of workshop tips number 8. So it's really 101, milling 101 or blocking out 101, whatever you want to call it. That seems to be the in thing to say these days. So this was probably one of the very first things that I learned in my apprenticeship around squaring stock up. It's a very useful thing to know, and again just want to reiterate the 2 things that are absolutely important around doing this, which is cleanliness and keeping track of your reference surfaces around the part and on your machine. And if you do all of that, you will end up with good results when you're squaring up. So I hope that was useful. Again, apologies to those guys that knew all of this stuff, but there will be some out there that probably haven't seen it or haven't understood it that well. So the aim of this video was to try and explain some of that thinking behind why you do it as well as how you do it. So hope you found that interesting. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to the new subscribers that have come along, and we'll catch you all very soon on another video when we'll be making something else.